Bonjour et bienvenue à la 49e édition du Festival du Nouveau Cinéma de Montréal. Cette année, le FNC offre une édition évolutive pour faire découvrir le meilleur du cinéma actuel en ligne partout au Canada. Mon nom est Maxime Labrecque et merci d'être avec nous. Hi and welcome to the 49th edition of Montreal Festival du Nouveau Cinéma. This year, FNC offers an evolving edition so you can discover the best of today's cinema online across Canada. My name is Maxime Labrecque and thanks for joining us today with two really interesting guests today for the film Sisters with Transistors. Hi.
Hey.
First of all, Lisa and Cara, can you both present yourself and what you did in the film, actually?
Go ahead, Lisa.
You want to go first?
You go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Lisa Rovner, and I am the director of Sisters with Transistors.
And my name's Cara Blake. I'm a Montreal-based filmmaker, editor, compositor, and I worked with Lisa on the film as one of the editors on Sisters with Transistors.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. And Lisa, you said you are in London right now.
That's right. It is about 2 p.m. The sun is shining, which is a rare thing these days. It's been raining, but yeah.
So we're going to take all the little pleasures like the weather can offer us lately. And first of all, how are you both doing? I need to ask just, because of the situation.
I'm good. I'm excited to finally be sharing the film with audiences. It's been a long wait. We had some premieres canceled in the spring, and then we were kind of waiting for everything to come back to normal. And of course, it's not. So yeah, it's just a very exciting fall for me because I'm finally able to share the film that we've been working so hard on for a number of years. So I'm good. Nice.
And I'm super excited to finally have the film here in Montreal because I've been talking about it with lots of people. So it's exciting to have the Canadian premiere.
Yes. So thank you for being here once again. And I have obviously quite a few questions for you because I love this documentary, which was a total discovery for me. Such a fascinating subject, the place of women amongst the sort of unsung heroes of electronic music. So I was captivated by right from the start. And as a scholar, I'm also interested in your methodology, if I could say. I was curious to know, how did you choose the artists you decided to talk about in this film?
So I have to start by saying that this is not a complete history. This is a history that is really dictated by the archive that we could find. So there are many more women out there that people should go and explore and find out about. But yeah, I would say that really the archive, the interviews, the visuals that we were able to find really dictated the story that we were able to tell.
So that was actually one of my questions. Was it easy gathering all the archives? Can you tell us a little bit more about your process there?
It was hell on earth.
Oh,
it was so
really?
hard. This archive was, every woman is different. So some of the women who are in the film, they have archives and they were able to share it with me, but some of them the archives are all over the place. So it was a lot of work. It was years and years of work. And then of course we had to fill in so many archives that were there to illustrate what was being said. So it was a huge amount of work. It took years. And it was actually until literally as I was doing the online edit. So normally your edit is supposed to be done. I was still swapping archive because of course some things we couldn't figure out who the rights owner were. So I'd found them on YouTube or I'd found them, so yeah, it was a big job. But it came together in the end. But yeah, it's a lot of work doing archive films.
I would say from the perspective of one of the editors, it was one of the films where there was the most kind of back and forth with the archive. Like usually you have, okay, here's my material, let's go. But this was really, we would work with the archive we had, and then it would become apparent, okay, well, we need to source some more things, or we need to really get creative with how we can tell this story with some of the women who were, Clara Rockmore she was active in the 20s, so there wasn't much material for her. And yeah, it just made us do a lot of creative problem solving, I would say.
Definitely.
And Kara, actually, as an editor, when using archives, you need to make the film into something more than, just assembling the historical footage in order to make something new and unique. And I actually love the voiceover that was placed in the images and the music as well. That was sort of like over everything. How did you work with Lisa in order to make a film with such a strong signature, not just an assembly of historical footage?
I think Lisa especially was always very conscious that we didn't want it to feel like visual wallpaper, as often happens in documentaries using a lot of archive material. It was really important that we come up with a way to marry the sound and the image in a very organic way so that it didn't feel like the visuals were just pasted on there. But I'd say that the audio, the speaking, and the music were really kind of the foundation from which we could build the visuals around. So that was sort of the starting point. And as much as possible, we wanted to have the women telling their stories in their own voice. So there's not a tremendous amount of other, interviewees filling in the gaps, but there's a few. So I think there was a strong vision from the outset of what we wanted to avoid and the direction we hope to go in.
Yeah, and I would just add that in terms of the voiceover, it had so many different forms. It started out being a very kind of dogmatic, information-based voiceover, and then that kind of was peeled away when we realized that wasn't really the way that we wanted to tell the story. So the voiceover, the writing was really a process of elimination almost, and we decided to go for something much more poetic rather than your typical, talking head documentary style voiceover.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you have your own signature there, because I was, as I said, fascinated, and I think it's a work of art in itself, the documentary. Just, you have to work with the archives, yes, but then make something more out of it. And that's, I think, what you achieved. So congratulations there. And I remember there was one of the artists, actually, she's drawing sound on film, and it reminded me a bit of, Norman McLaren and the NFB with his experiments, but we rarely hear about women. So I find your documentary even more necessary there. And I was wondering, actually, how familiar were you with this subject before even starting working on the documentary, both of you?
So when I thought of the early history of electronic music, I really thought of men. So when I discovered these women kind of by chance in a kind of article that was saying, oh, all these women that you've never heard of, I was immediately kind of drawn to the subject. I'd heard of a few, but I wasn't really familiar with all of them. And then, of course, the reason I got in touch with Kara in the first place is because she had made a short film about Delia Derbyshire, which is just so great. So that's kind of how we connected on the subject. Maybe you want to talk more.
Yeah, so I was familiar with Delia, but like Lisa, I wasn't so familiar with a lot of the other women, and it was really an exciting prospect to kind of revisit Delia because I love her, but also to put her in a broader context with these other women who were kind of working around the same time period, and to just broaden up the story and shine the light on even more women that had not really been recognized in the field. So yeah, it was great to kind of sink into that world again.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Delia Derbyshire, I love actually the loops that she does. I learned a lot about, early electronic music, which seems very tangible, like the early editing methods. And what is your fascination with the analog format and everything that is not virtual, besides the homage, which is obvious here? Is there sort of a nostalgia of the early days of electronic music you both share?
Well, I definitely do see that equivalent with filmmaking in analog processes, like just the tactility and the physical nature of the film, or in this case, the magnetic tape that they're working with. There's a different quality that is not there with digital, I think. And yeah, it kind of has a built-in nostalgia to it that I've always just kind of been drawn to, I guess. Like it presents more the trace of the maker, I think, when you can see some of these like flaws and aberrations in the actual physical format or hear it in the sound. And I always kind of like that. To be reminded that people aren't perfect. Just like me, not perfect.
Yeah, I think there's so much beauty in accidents, the accidents that you have with film or with tape when you're working in sound. So yeah, I definitely agree with everything that you've just said. And I also just always love working with Super 8, always love working with film, always took, or still continue to take photographs with film, just not knowing what you have until it's done. And so just having to work with like trusting just having to work with trust and chance, all those things that I've always been very drawn to.
I was wondering about also another one of the artists you interviewed, who is Bibi Baron in New York City. First of all, is she still alive? And I was wondering actually, because this whole historical portrait that you make of all the artists, I was wondering at some point, of course, some of them passed away, but some of them, did you manage to record new interviews, or most of them were previously recorded footage that you used?
So, sorry, that's my dog.
That happens.
Bibi Baron passed away, and we really didn't have much material to work with in terms of her, what had been recorded, the interviews that she had done. So that was quite a limiting and challenging. Her section was particularly challenging. So I'm really happy that you were, bringing her up. Most of the women have passed away. The end of the film, the three women at the end of the film, so Suzanne, Laurie, and Eliane are the three women that are still with us. And so it was important to us to kind of end the film in the present. And that is, so those are the three that are still with us. And we did interview those women. We met them, interviewed them, and filmed them, but they were the only ones that we were able to capture in the present.
And speaking of Eliane Radig, she says something at one point which I found quite interesting. She says that electronic music was considered diabolical in the 40s in France. How come? Do you know?
I think it was just such a strange sound. It was eerie, it was strange, it was scary. I think most people, now we're so used to these kind of other sounds, but I think for most people it was just a scary sound. Something that had nothing to do with the music that was being made at the time. So I guess it's just the other is always a bit scary, but yeah, I love her, the way that she, the diabolical is such a great way of categorizing or characterizing early electronic music, because it really was this kind of, strange.
I think a lot of people felt that that this music was strictly being made by machines, like they weren't able to kind of sense the human behind it initially. I think that came with the music by these women, like Delia, for sure. They had a hand in kind of shaping people's perception about like what electronic music could be, and the realization that these machines aren't making these sounds on their own. There is always somebody behind them. making choices, and
the machines are going to take over.
yeah.
And speaking of music, actually, can you tell me a little bit more about, the sort of strange alien-like electronic sounds in the background of the film sometimes, and the music that is added there, it creates sort of, you were talking about this eerie feeling, and I was wondering if you composed some original tracks for the film, you used previously existing ones.
So most of the music in the film, most of the sounds that you hear in the film are generally or mostly compositions made by the women.
Mm-hmm.
So within their sections, you hear music, for example, when you're with Eliane, you hear her music. When you're with Pauline, you hear her music. But we did work with a sound engineer called Marta Saloni, and she and I, towards the end of the film, so really at the end, we kind of just, she's just amazing at, she's sculpting sounds, I guess I would say, and adding little reverbs here and sound effects there. So we did have some fun at the end, kind of just, I guess one of the things that was really important to me with the sound was to make it almost like a 3D sound. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the material that we had was very flat, especially the stuff coming from the archives.
Okay.
And so it was really fun to kind of spatialize that and give those sounds dimension, to make you feel, just to make them more present. But
Sarah, did you want to add something? I'm sorry.
No, but there was no music composed specifically. It was more sounds composed.
Yeah, I think that there had been discussions of having somebody do some original music, but it kind of became apparent that wasn't necessary, that it was better to just highlight the music of the women themselves. And I think the sound designer did a great job in just creating very smooth transitions between those different musical segments. She did a great job.
Mm-hmm. You establish in the film parallels between the feminist movement and the women who make electronic music. And I would like to know if you could expand a little bit more on that message that was included, even in the editing of the film. We feel this presence, this message, or this empowerment in the film as well. So was that there at the origin when you started the whole process, this idea? How did it came through in the film when you were making it?
I think it's one of the things, this idea that these women were enabled by the technology to be composers is one of the big reasons that actually I wanted to make this film. I actually studied political science at McGill in Montreal. And so I've always had this interest in I guess feminism and her story versus history and all these things. But yeah, it was definitely something that drew me to the story, and it was something that I wanted to include, but I didn't want it to feel overpowering or patronizing in any way. I wanted it to be there, but really in a kind of natural and organic way rather than a over the top way. But it is something that I did set out to make a political film. That was like my goal. It's not just about making a story about these great women. It was really to kind of try to, I did try to shape that into the story, into the narrative.
And I think it's just sort of the right time for this film in terms of giving women their voices back. Basically, this film is allowing these women to be heard, and I think that really speaks to what's going on in the world in many places.
Completely. And there's even a sentence in the film, composers are old, white, dead men. And your film actually is a worldwide tour. We go really like many different places and a history lesson at the same time. And my last question for you is sort of a follow-up from this one. How do you think the film can be an inspiration for young girls today?
I've always been super inspired when I discover a female artist, a female filmmaker that with whom I share a passion, a theme, a subject, an interest, with whom I share curiosity. So yeah, I think this hopefully will have a huge impact and inspire everyone to create in their own ways. I think I was super drawn to these women as, you know, as a female filmmaker. I was drawn to they just have so much agency. And I think that's the thing that I hope that people kind of leave with, whether they make music or some other art form. I just want them to live their lives with agency. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and success comes in many different ways. And I think that's what I think is so interesting about this film, is that these women didn't have that kind of typical success, but I find, were super successful in their work and in their lives. I hope that other people will too. This is my dog.
Oh, hi. And Kara, did you want to add something as well?
I think there's one of the speakers towards the very end of the film says something that there's something psychological that happens when you can see yourself in the people that are being celebrated. And I think that this film does a really good job of that, of celebrating people that aren't typically or haven't historically been celebrated. And so if that inspires, you know, the next generation of electronic music makers, females, then I think that's great. I think we achieved the goal that was we set out to do.
And I think you did. So Lisa and Kara, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your input on this amazing documentary. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And if you like this program, please don't be shy. You can share it on social media and follow the FNC on Facebook and Instagram. Our 49th edition is in full swing online across Canada until October 31st. So feel free to discover other films, be curious. Alors, nos films et Q&A vous ont plu, j'espère que oui. N'hésitez donc pas à partager et suivre le FNC sur Facebook, sur Instagram. La 49e édition bat son plein en ligne jusqu'au 31 octobre partout au Canada. Découvrez-y d'autres films, soyez curieux et surtout merci d'avoir été des nôtres aujourd'hui. Je vous souhaite une excellente journée ou soirée, où que vous soyez. Merci.